And hello, this study is called Faculty Initiative and the Role of Self-Efficacy in Raising Digital Literacy. It is toward a doctorate in education from the University of St. Francis in Joliet, Illinois, which was awarded on October 22nd, 2019. The field is educational technology, and it's been less than 2 generations since we've seen a migration from teaching machines to the computer revolution, and now upon us, the Internet of Things. All in all, it is a great time to be an educational technologist, sharing our ideas with higher education faculty who are eager to listen. And many times, that's what you hear. A lot of the time, in fact. See, the book that has haunted me since my graduate studies back in the 1990s is this one by Larry Cuban, Teachers and Machines. And on pages 71 and 72, the words that capture the theme of the book are right here. And even further, the password that will unlock the classroom door to educational technology remains in the teacher's head. This study has been, in a way, a pursuit of that password. So, the purpose of this mixed methods explanatory study is described in a paragraph taken right out of the dissertation. What are the factors that influence faculty to embrace technology in hopes of capitalizing on whatever discoveries are made to improve professional development and raise the technological bar for faculty? The bottom line is that choice gets complicated. It is about what faculty choose, but it is based upon what they believe to be the technology's potential for usefulness, for its ability to improve learning outcomes. Is it simply worth the time and effort? And are they ready to engage with the technology? These factors gave rise to a construct for this study called Faculty Initiative, which is an instructor's readiness to engage with technology on their terms. Think of it as choice on steroids. The litmus test? Digital literacy. The research questions which were used for the quantitative part of the study included two major questions. Does faculty initiative through a professional development activity lead to an increase in digital literacy? What is the nature of the correlational relationship between self-efficacy and digital literacy? And because these two questions are intrinsically tied to adoption of technology and the faculty members' attempts to overcome fear of technology, two additional questions. Does a tendency to adopt technology rise? Do they become more perceptive, rather receptive to technology? And because faculty initiative itself is a new construct, it was felt that it should be measured too. What is the effect of choice on faculty initiative? Directional hypotheses are what were chosen for this study, and I'll give you a chance to look at those. Initiative leading to a positive result in digital literacy, a positive correlation between self-efficacy and digital literacy. Does digital literacy is believed to increase the likelihood of faculty adoption and faculty receptiveness, and whether or not the presence of voluntary choice results in a positive increase. That is hypothesized as well. The qualitative questions which were used for this study are basically what kept them going in the study. How did time, or the perception of having enough time to experiment, affect their motivation? What was it about having a social interaction with peers that kept them going in the professional development activity? So on to the review of the literature, and I guess the topmost question for all of this is, who cares? Well, it kind of turns out that you care. Teacher certification is in various states, including Illinois, look at technology capability as a very, very high criterion. If you go from college to college and you survey faculty, they will quite frequently identify technology as worthy of a professional development. And study after study on the national level, such as studies from EDUCAUSE, all suggest that faculty begrudgingly consider technology important at the same time that they question it. See, there's this digital divide, and it's internal to the faculty and external between and among classes. There's a fear of technology. The faculty member may have a low self-opinion or simply be averse to using technology in favor of the simple chalkboard style of teaching. There's also pushback against Rogers diffusion theory. We all know that there are early adopters and that there's an early majority and they're innovators, but if you're a faculty member being asked to consider professional development in technology, how would you like to be considered as a late majority, or even better, or worse, a laggard? Instead, there's more favor for something called the Gartner hype cycle, in which the challenge is to find out what triggers the faculty's interest in technology, or have they reached a point where they've used technology and seen its limitations so that they become frustrated, and then slide down into a trough of disillusionment, and then the question becomes, what will it take to get them to be more productive with technology? So there's the Gartner hype cycle. There's also a finding from a study, and by the way, when I use a parenthetical citation, I am referring to the references in the dissertation itself. There's this finding by Adam Turner which suggests that low levels of technology adoption are caused by low digital literacy. That was in part a justification for this study. Speaking of digital literacy, there are as many definitions as there are leaves on a tree. And here's an extract from the International Standards for Technology in Education, which are rather complicated. And then there's also this construct called TPAC, developed by Mishra and Kohler in 2006, in which the goal is to get the instructor in the sweet spot where these spheres intersect. Now, there is some pushback against this theory. It's not without its critics. Some say that there are ambiguous connections between the spheres or that an action plan is missing, but it grew out of Mishra and Kohler's development of a training protocol called Learning Technology by Design. And that, too, influenced something called LARS, which was developed primarily by the University of Columbia, but it probably had a lot of other academics working on it, in which you have a professional development paradigm where the faculty learn, they apply, they reflect upon, and then they share the results of their work with others. It's teacher-centered, it's goal-oriented, and it's facilitator-supported. So LARS was a strategy that was used for the professional development activities for this study. All in all, digital literacy is defined for the study in both broad and narrow terms. And it's not something that's uniformly applied. For the instructor who's teaching media, digital literacy will be involved in knowing how to use media creation software like Adobe Premiere Pro, or those Adobe Creative Cloud products, or maybe even Camtasia. For the instructor in statistics, using SPSS is going to be the framework for their feelings of digital literacy. But regardless of what is being taught and the context, the holy grail is to get the faculty member to become digitally literate. And let's not forget the role of self-efficacy as championed by Albert Bandura. Self-efficacy is mentioned several times as a measure of technology adoption and as it relates to digital literacy. How self-efficacy leads to agency, how it leads to teachers taking ownership of their training, and as a topic of further study, it is mentioned in the research. So, professional development for technological skills works when faculty have a choice. They can put it into a teaching context where they believe the training has a value. They have a comfort level and a belief that it improves learning, that they have time to experiment and play, and that they're challenged to share their accomplishments. It is very consistent with the message of intrinsic motivation. In the book Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us by the author Daniel Pink, in which he says the best strategy is to determine what's important to employees, provide them a sense of urgency, give them support, and then get out of their way. But let's also face it, technology training can be grueling. But at the end of the day, it can be very rewarding. And it is something that Kidd says is worthy of further study. So this was a mixed methods explanatory study, like I said. We had a control group. We had a convenient sample of faculty. 40 faculty participated, 26 finished, so there was high attrition. The control group of 7 faculty were required to take a 2-week online course in learning how to use the Canvas learning management system. Mandated training. The experimental group was also enrolled in a 2-week-long online professional development activity patterned after Lars, in which they chose the technology that they wanted to explore. Both groups were given a pre-survey of Likert-style questions of agreement on an ordinal scale of 1 to 5, 5 equaling strongly agree. Both were then subjected to the professional development activity. The experimental group was then also given a self-efficacy survey toward the end of training to measure contemporaneous feelings of self-efficacy based on recommendations by Bandura. And then both were given a post-survey. And then came the qualitative questions. Now the survey itself, the dependent variables across the top, digital literacy, adoption, receptiveness, self-efficacy, and faculty initiative, are all built upon questions which are coded below. And each one of those codes, like under digital literacy, you see 7 there, all are coded for questions which are intended to gather ordinal data on a 1 to 5 scale, except for self-efficacy. According to Bandura's recommendations, you measure it contemporaneously on a scale of 1 to 10, and it's an ordinal scale of confidence. So this ordinal data was then computed using SPSS into scalar composite variables that you see across the top, and those were used for statistical analysis. A pilot test of this survey by 13 faculty from USF and Dominican University yielded a Cronbach's alpha for internal consistency and reliability of .886, which is very, very high. So away we go. For research questions 1, 3, 4, and 5, for the hypotheses of whether the variable on the left affected the variable on the right, paired t and independent samples t-tests were used. And for research question 2, to determine a correlation, the Pearson's R correlation formula was used. And then qualitative interviews rounded out the study. For all the data that you were about to see, all distributions were considered normal. The alpha for confidence in the data collection was set at 0.5, or 95% confidence. Whenever you see a t, it represents the amount of difference between means, and it is expressed as a multiple. Whenever you see d, as in Cohen's d, that stands for the magnitude or the strength of the effect of the difference. And that is expressed as standard deviations. So let's go on to describe the data. To answer the first research question, a paired t-test measured or compared the results from the pre-survey to the post-survey. Now for the control group, you saw that much of an increase. It was statistically significant. In the experimental group, the pre-survey's results showed a larger increase, so that there was agreement in feelings of digital literacy, with a statistical significance of .002, and a multiple which was more than twice that of the control group, and a Cohen's d for strength of effect of .78. When you compare the two groups, the control group ended their in the post survey ended with digital literacy perceptions of 3.5, while there was stronger agreement in the experimental group with statistical significance and a Cohen's d of .96. Now, to look at the correlation of self-efficacy with digital literacy, it is important to show you that in the frequency table for self-efficacy, more than 20% had maximum feelings of self-efficacy, a full 10, but there were a few who did not. They were more neutral or even less confident in terms of self-efficacy. For the frequency table in digital literacy, there were 19 surveyed, again, and 15 had agreement to strong agreement in terms of digital literacy, but there were a few who did not. Their feelings were more neutral. So the correlation was positive at a level of .551 with statistical significance that you see there. To answer the research question on feelings of adoption and the paired t-test, both results were insignificant. So that leaves us with the independent samples t to compare the experimental group with the control group. And in the experimental group, you had strong feelings of adoption compared with the control group, with the statistical significance of .10 and a Cohen's d effect of 1.15 standard deviations. For the question on receptiveness, very, very little change from the pre-survey to the post-survey, but it was statistically significant. Whereas for the experimental group, they came in with feelings of high receptiveness to technology and ended with stronger feelings by a multiple which was much greater than that of the control group, with statistical significance and a Cohen's d of .805. When you compare the control group with the experimental group, you can see the difference there by that multiple with statistical significance and a Cohen's d of more than a standard deviation. When you look at the influence of choice on faculty initiative, or I should say the effect, the control group's results were insignificant. But with the experimental group, they came in with somewhat with a modest level of agreement of faculty initiative and ended with strong feelings that they were engaged with what they were doing by a multiple of 6, 100% confidence, and a Cohen's d of 1.6 standard deviations. And then when you look at comparing the control group with the experimental group, you can see the difference, which was pretty huge, by that multiple with 100% confidence and a Cohen's d of more than 2 standard deviations. Turning to the qualitative data, the first question's themes across the top were categorized as 3: the desire to learn, overcoming resistance to technology, and positive changes. Those themes all were derived from the codes which were gathered on the left, from the number of mentions that these were articulated by 9 faculty who were surveyed, or rather who were given audio interviews. It's important to note that choice had a lot to do with the desire to learn, but it was also motivation to just learn technology and to improve teaching, or just the desire to use media. Overcoming resistance to technology had a lot to do with competing priorities. Many faculty just had too much on their plate. Some of them were able to deal with that, but the competing priorities was probably the biggest reason for the level of attrition in the study. In terms of achieving positive changes from the experience, most people mentioned feelings of mastery as a strong factor. In terms of how much did having time to experiment motivate them, most said that the time structure of the workshop, 2 weeks, was appropriate, plus the promise of time to experiment. And in terms of having social interaction with peers, much of the influence of that was just from observing other people work. But a lot of it had to do with the feelings of empathy with others, feedback from the facilitator as a peer. But there were a few who felt that interaction with peers was not important to their own progress. So what does it all mean? Let's consider the hypotheses again. In the upper right-hand corner, you see the results of the pre- and post-survey for the control group in red and for the experimental group in green. Recall that the Cohen's d was only 0.38 for the control group. For the experimental group, a much stronger effect. And for the independent samples t-test, when you compare the experimental group with the control group, the Cohen's d was almost a full standard deviation, which means that there's a 76% probability that anyone from the experimental group will have a higher score than anyone from the control group. Now, this is supported by the research that suggests adults learn best when they have a say and believe the technology to be worthwhile, and that teaching digital technology must be put into the context of its use as a teaching tool, not as a toy. This was borne out by some of the qualitative statements that you can see here, just simply feeling that they had a say with using the technology and having time to experiment, or even the perception that they had permission to take time out of their life to go into a technology sandbox and to believe it was okay to make mistakes. So this hypothesis is accepted. For the correlation between self-efficacy and digital literacy, again, it was positive, indicating a strong positive relationship, as you can see on the graph there. And it matches with the research, which suggests that when you have self-efficacy, you have more perseverance, tenacity. The shared experiences of success among your peers feeds into it, and you get a sense of accomplishment, as reflected by the statement from the student who used Camtasia. Never knew that she was going to be good at editing and video. But if you listen to the audio interview, you can almost hear the exclamation point at the end of that sentence. So this hypothesis is accepted. In terms of digital literacy leading to adoption, a little bit shakier here. Recall that paired t-tests were insignificant. But in the independent samples t-test, comparing the experimental group with the control group, you had a strong effect. And it is supported by the research which suggests that self-efficacy and technological literacy are related but not necessarily uniformly. And just because you have a sense of effectiveness in achieving digital literacy doesn't necessarily mean you're going to adopt the technology. That is borne out by the statement from one faculty member, which just really reflects this. Technology has to be my mule. It has to carry something that I want carried, and I don't like having to carry technology. So this hypothesis is accepted, although a little bit more shaky than the other hypotheses. Some could even argue that the hypothesis is rejected, but I'm going to take the glass half full. For digital literacy leading to receptiveness, again, there are the comparisons in the from pre to post tests. Very, very weak strength of effect for the control group, and as you can see, there was a very little change. For the experimental group, you had that much of a change, which was strong with that Cohen's d result. And in comparing the results of the experimental group with the control group, you have more than a standard deviation of effect. And that's borne out by the statements that say one cannot adopt technology if one is afraid or non-receptive, but as they persevere, they begin to conquer their fear. And again, it's supported by having a say in the technology and the professional development. Some of the qualitative statements that bear this out was feeling challenged and yet being able to overcome their psychological block, or getting the help of the facilitator to help them when they were struggling. Those were things that fueled their motivation to just keep on going and become more receptive to technology. So this hypothesis is accepted. Finally, when you look at the influence or the effect of choice on the level of engagement of faculty as expressed in faculty initiative, again, for the control group, the paired t-test was insignificant, but for the experimental group, big change in feelings of faculty initiative with a large effect, more than 1.5 standard deviations. That's from pre to post test. And then when you look at the difference between the control group and the experimental group, not only do you have a huge difference in means, you have a whopping effect of more than 2 standard deviations. And that's some of the research which supports this, that faculty having a say and a voice, believing the PD is worthwhile, and being able to take ownership of the training. That all feeds into the results that you see here. And these are some of the qualitative statements that bear a lot of this out. Being able to bounce ideas off peers, or sometimes the impression that, oh my goodness, my colleagues are so advanced, maybe I can learn something from them. And I did not feel like I was alone. Those are the things which resonate with these results. So this hypothesis is also accepted. In conclusion, some of the recommendations for practice in the study, let's use LARS again. It fosters agency and accomplishment. I think it's important for the technologist to focus on the needs of instructors to exhibit understanding, empathy, support, and goal orientation. This is all reinforced. Workshops that show the faculty how to use a technology but without a teaching concept. Let's face it, sometimes you have to roll out certain workshops to update faculty on the use of a technology. But as a principal means of training, simple workshops without a teaching context don't work. So more of putting the technology training in a teaching context. Could the faculty initiative questions in the survey be transferred from a measure of agreement to a measure of likelihood? Could it be used as a way to rate technology? And then the educational technologists perhaps should reconsider their role. Should they be a techno-promoter or more of an honest broker, and perhaps adopt a more circumspect and objective attitude with technology versus simply accepting vendors' claims about technology? For further research, this was a convenience sample-based dissertation, and convenience samples are criticized for being vulnerable to systematic bias and a misestimation of results, but they're also useful in generating theories. And there are studies mentioned in the dissertation that suggest that the higher the T, or the difference between means, and the D, the strength of the effect, the greater the chance that the results of the study can be replicated in future studies. So the suggestion here is to repeat this study. Study different applications of faculty initiative for their effectiveness, such as a Likert scale of likelihood to rate technology, and the LARS approach itself to promote, or rather, use the LARS approach itself to apply the LARS. Picking it up, 3, 2, 1. And finally, further study the effectiveness of the LARS approach on professional development of faculty. So that's the end of my study. There are a lot of people to thank: the folks at Dominican University, members of my family, my dissertation advisor. I'd like to give a shout out for Pam Steinke, who was the former Dean of Teaching and Learning, is now at one of the universities in the Carolinas, who helped me define faculty initiative. This has been quite a go. But I hope the results of this study are helpful to you, and I wish you a good day.